In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the quadratic formula. When you are using the quadratic formula, you're essentially using the shortcut to completing the square to solve for a variable. Hence the name quadratic. This means that our function or our equation has to be a degree of 2, meaning that there is a variable raised to the second power. And if you use the quadratic formula, pretty much you are using the formula to find solutions, roots, x-intercepts, and zeros. All these four words are mathematically synonyms: zeros, x-intercept, solutions, and roots. So what is the quadratic formula? The quadratic formula, since you are solving for something, you're solving for the x-intercept, is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So what exactly is it that you need to know in order to use a quadratic formula? Your equation needs to be in standard form. Equation in standard form. Alright, that means that your equation is going to be in this form. All your numbers, or your terms I should say, are going to be on the left side of the equation. That way the right side is 0, or vice versa. The left side can be 0 and then the right side can be all the terms. Alright, once you know this, alright, you are using your A, B, and C. All these are going to equal to some numbers. Let me scoot this over, and that way I can put equal some number. When you are using the quadratic formula, you are not using any variables inside this formula right here. The only variable is this one out here. There are different ways to memorize the quadratic formula. One of those ways is to using the nursery rhyme of Pop Goes the Weasel. Use that same melody, but use the quadratic formula, and here it is. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That is one way to try to memorize the quadratic formula. There is a small story that is involved to remember the quadratic formula, and that story goes as is. There once was a negative boy who was thinking whether or not to go to a radical party. At the party, he talked to a squared boy, but not to 4 awesome chicks. Before we knew it, it was all over 2 a.m. Those are two different ways of memorizing the quadratic formula. So now let's use the quadratic formula in our first example. We are asked, what are the solutions to the function f of x equals x squared plus 4x minus 5? We have to use the quadratic formula because we are finding a solution or solutions to this particular here. So we have x squared plus 4x minus 5. We need to know what our a, b, and c are in order to use the quadratic formula. A, b, and c are the numbers that multiply with their variables. A multiplies with x squared, which is 1. B is the one that multiplies with x, which is positive 4. And c is our constant, negative 5. Once we do that, we got to recall the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So when I substitute in the quadratic formula these numbers, I like to rewrite the formula with parentheses. The reason I'm doing these parentheses is because a lot of people forget to include their signs when I substitute in here. So b goes in here, b is 4, 4 goes here, a is 1, c is negative 5, and a is 1. When I do this, I do remember to carry my negative for c. A and b were positive. A lot of people forget to do this, especially in this very first term, or right here. But if you do this, what I just did before that, we should be able to, and you should be able to, finish this without making, hopefully, any more mistakes. So this is going to be negative 4 plus or minus the square root. 4 squared is 16. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Times negative 5 is positive 20. 2 times 1 is 2. So now I have x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 36 all over 2. I cannot reduce the 4 and the 2 so far, I should say negative 4 and 2 so far, because I need to make sure that negative 4 combines with the square root of 36. So that step is going to continue over here. X equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 36 is 6, and this is all over 2. So now this plus or minus plays in our solutions. Now it's going to create two different x values. X is equal to negative 4 minus 6 all over 2, or x equals negative 4 plus 6 all over 2. I like using the negative first because it reminds me that I still need to use the positive. If I use the positive, more than likely I'm going to forget that there is a different solution. So in this case, x produces negative 4 minus 6 is negative 10. Divide that by 2, so x equals negative 5. Or x equals negative 4 plus 6 is 2. Divided by 2, which is 1. This here is your final answer. There is a different way of seeing the final answer, and that final answer is negative 5, comma, 1. Writing the final answer in braces is a different way. That is correct. It just depends on which way, on the multiple choice, I should say, right? Which way that multiple choice is given to you. Example 2. Solve 3x squared minus 7 by using the quadratic formula. Do not use a calculator. So we need to start by getting everything to the one side of the equation. And by doing that, I need to add 7 to both sides. That way, one side is equal to 0. Once all the terms are on the left side, I need to know what my a, b, and c values are. C is always my constant, so that is positive 7. A always multiplies with my variable squared. My variable squared is x squared, so A is positive 3. B always multiplies with x, or only my variable. There is no only x here, so B is going to be 0. Reminder of the quadratic formula. There was a negative boy that could not decide whether or not to attend a radical party. He was talking to another boy squared, but not for awesome chicks. Before he knew it, the party was all over at 2 a.m. So when we use the quadratic formula, x equals 4 times a times c all over 2a. Again, I'm doing this that way I can substitute my numbers incorrectly here. Plus 7. I'm forgetting 3 here. So that means that x equals 0 plus or minus 0. 0 plus or minus the square root of 0 minus 12 times 7 all over 6. So x equals the square root, the positive and negative square root of negative 84 all over 6. 12 times 7 is 84. When we split up 84, since we're not using a calculator, this is side work over here. I know that I use 4, 3, and 7. 4 is a perfect square, so I'm going to divide 84 by 4. That means 3 times 7 is 21. 4 is already a perfect square. 21 is not a perfect square, cannot be broken down into perfect squares because I know it breaks down to 3 and 87. So instead of rewriting 84, I'm going to be writing x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 4 times the square root of 21 all over 6. When I do that, x is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 4 is 2 times the imaginary number, times the square root of 21 all over 6. Here I am able to reduce the 2 and the 6 and not do it. I'm not worried about anything else. The 21 is protected by itself. This plus or minus is not being added with something else. So in this case, my final answer equals to plus or minus I times the square root of 21 all over 3. Or the different way that you can be shown the answer is negative I times the square root of 21 all over 3, comma, I times the square root of 21 all over 3. These are valid and correct answers. Example 3 is asking us what are the zeros or x-intercepts of the equation t squared plus 6t plus 2 equals negative 9 plus 7t squared, and we are going to round to the nearest thousandth. So that means that we are using 4 decimal places and we are able to use a calculator. This is somewhat a little bit easier to do if you have a calculator. All right, I'm going to do some work. I'm going to tell you suggestion where to start using the calculator, but I will continue the work and then I'm going to use a calculator and tell you the final answer afterwards. So in this part, in this example I should say, we want all our terms to be on one side of the equal sign. But I've never told you, is it better to do it on the left or on the right side for our terms? In this case, we want our variable squared to be positive. Here we have variable squared and another one over here. Which of the two is the biggest one? T squared or positive 7t? The 7t is already positive. It is bigger over here. So what I am going to do, I am going to bring these three terms over to this right hand side in order for the left to be 0. So minus t squared. I have to do the same thing over here, minus t squared. Minus 6t minus 6t, since there are no t to combine with, and then minus 2, minus 2. So this is going to become 0 equals 7 minus 1 is 6t squared minus 6t minus 11. From here we can see that our a equals to positive 6, b equals to negative 6, and our c equals to negative 11. So when we place into the formula, now I'm going to use t equals as opposed to x equals because our variable here is t. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4a times c all over 2a. If you have a calculator, graphing calculator, you're able to put these in the calculator very easy. All you have to do is just remember that you need to, when you use the square root, it opens a parenthesis here. Make sure that you close it here, and then as well as having this parenthesis, and then this one as well if you are going to do that in a calculator. Right, so in this case this is negative 6, negative 6, four times a times c, and then times a. So now we have t equals, now this is positive 6 plus or minus the square root. This is now 36 minus, or I should say negative 4 times positive 6. Yeah, it is negative 24 times negative 11 all over 12. If you have a calculator, I would use the plus, and that's going to give me a positive answer. And then I would use the second time as a minus in order to get the other one in the negative. I'm going to continue just a little bit more. So I have t equals 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 plus 264 all over 12. T equals 6 plus or minus the square root of 300 all over 12. Calculator wise, now this is where I would use my calculator. For that. And let me get out my calculator to do that. So now I have so now this t is going to be 0.94337, and then this other t is going to be, this is negative I should say, positive 1.94337. So this one gives me this number, this one gives me that one. So if I'm rounding to the nearest thousandth, then I'm going to have negative 0.9433. That's for that one, and then the other one is 1.9433. and that is finding the zeros or the x-intercepts, or in this case t-intercepts, since t is our variable, of that equation.